we were under near constant fire. There were 826 large caliber ordnance strikes on the ship. Ronnie says, well, they hit us with everything else. What else can they hit us with? And he said, you do what you want to. He said, I'm going to write a letter home. He sat down, stuck a piece of paper in his typewriter, and began typing out, Dear Eileen, you won't believe what's happening to us. And Mr. Bennett, the division officer, stuck his head in the door and said, Sergeant Lockwood, you come here a minute, please. I stepped out in a passageway, and there were stacks of these ditching bags, all this classified information there. And Mr. Bennett and Lieutenant Commander Dave Lewis, Mr. Lewis was a senior intelligence officer aboard the ship, had just got me in a conversation about getting a working party together and getting those ditching bags topside and pitching them over into the sea. Suddenly there was a blinding flash of flame and a deafening noise. And I was knocked to the deck, and I thought, well, Lord, I guess this is it. I guess I'm coming home. At least Lois and the kids are taken care of. And I felt something wet. And I looked down, and water was gushing in through a collapsed bulkhead. We were pretty much in the center part of the ship. We had sheet steel bulkheads that separated the various offices. There were manual Morse operators, there were voice intercept section operators, there were teletype intercept section operators, and each one of those divisions were separated on a need to know basis, as well as the people that processed that information and sent it on to the National Security Agency. When the torpedo struck, that temporary bulkhead had mushroomed out and split open. And I, oh my God, we're in trouble. Felt all that water gushing in, and it was coming up my waist. I didn't really realize until many years later the Israelis had sent 3 motor torpedo boats to attack us, and they had fired 5 torpedoes. That's enough to sink an aircraft carrier. Only one had struck us, and it had struck within 10 feet of me, and I was actually facing it. I heard a moan behind me, and I struggled to my feet, and I turned around, and there was a sailor there that was pinned in between the remnants of that temporary bulkhead and the ladderway, which is the only way out. Mind you, there was about 180 intelligence collection people and processing people that were in that sealed compartment under the waterline. And the only way out was this 2-foot wide, very steep, narrow ladderway. I didn't find out who it was until 25 years later. His name was Joe Lentini. Joe was a teletype operator, and we were trying to get a mayday out through teletype, and it wasn't working. We had what we called a KW-26, which was a scramble machine. There were IBM cards that were put in this machine, and you had to have a separate IBM card for each day to operate. We had the wrong card in there. It's the reason we weren't getting our communications out. There was a phone there in that center passageway, which went to the antennas. Joe Lentini had gone into that passageway to pick up that phone and try to contact the gentleman that was operating the antennas in the topside after part of the ship. And a piece of shrapnel from an Israeli rocket had struck him in the left thigh, and he was bleeding profusely. And he'd sat down on the deck, leaned up against the ladderway, and was putting a tourniquet on that wound when the torpedo struck. And that sheet steel bulkhead slammed into his uplifted left knee and literally made toothpicks out of his femur bone. He was moaning. I got my arms under his arms and tried to pull him loose, and he was wedged in there tightly. And I said, "Come on, you got to help me. I can't do it by myself." The water was coming up rapidly. It was almost up to his chin by then. I said, "Come on, get your legs under you and push, push." And I didn't realize that his left leg was useless, but he got his right leg under him just enough, and he was able to push just enough to where I could free him and keep him from drowning. There were a bunch of pipes suspended from the overhead, which carried cables, electric cables, and antenna cables. I said, "Here, get a hold of these pipes up here." And water was almost to the overhead by then. We only had about 1.5 feet of airspace. And I saw a body starting to float by towards the torpedo hole, and I reached down, got an arm around him, and held him above water. And mind you, out of 180 people all trying to get out, there was a lot of confusion and shouting. And as loudly as I could, I hollered, "Knock it off! If y'all don't settle down, none of us will get out of here alive." And I heard a voice at the top of the ladderway, "This is Mr. Bennett, open this hatch." And apparently I passed out because I don't remember for some period of time. The next thing that I remember is everyone is gone. It's flooded. There's no light, just very little bit of light. Even the emergency lighting was off. Water everywhere, and I'm trying to hold this sailor up. I didn't realize until later when the torpedo struck, there was a large fuel tank on the starboard side where the torpedo struck. Bunker oil, which is used for the boilers on the ship, that had ruptured, and that oil was everywhere. I tried to start up the ladderway and dropped him, and what was happening is the ship was rolling with the natural tides of the sea, and when it would roll, that water would gush in and gush out the torpedo hole. That torpedo hole was roughly 36 by 42 feet. You could put the end of a small house inside the hole. The water was literally just gushing in and gushing back out. I dropped him, and he's heading out the torpedo hole. Went back and got him. Start back up the ladderway, and I get about halfway up, and a piece of shrapnel from the torpedo had struck the railing. There was a square metal railing. It struck that railing and bent it in to where there was only about 1 foot of space. I got next to that place where the railing was bent, dropped him again. He was going back out the hole, went back, got him again, start back up the ladderway again, get to the top of the ladderway, and the hatch is sealed shut. I'm trying to hold his head above water and pound on the hatch, and there was a scuttle hole in the center of the hatch. That hatch was about 4 feet by 6 feet and fit onto a thick steel flange. And there were metal dogs and large bolts, which were bolted into place to keep that hatch sealed shut. When you were normal operation, that hatch was propped open so he could easily access the spaces below, but under threat from the sea, that had to be sealed shut to keep the ship from sinking. There was a scuttle hole in the center at about the width of a man's shoulders, and that was how those men that were sealed down there were getting out. I could not get out that way with this unconscious sailor, so I'm pounding on the hatch, and a fellow named Bobby Schnell heard me pounding on the hatch and got the wrench and loosened the bolts and opened the hatch to let me out. And I'm trying to pull him out, and I'm pretty weak, and get him caught, and I'm pulling on him, and there was a sailor standing there, Phil, turning. He said, "Wait a minute, you got his foot caught." When I turned him over to try to pull him out, there was a chain that was one end welded to the rod that held up the hatch, and the other end to the flange on the outside of the seal. And his foot had neatly caught in that chain, and I was trying to pull his leg off. It wasn't working out very well. And Phil freed his foot, and he said, "There's a bin there with life jackets. You need to get a life jacket on him, and um, you need to go back, take him back to the messing areas where they were working on the severely wounded." So I got a life vest on him and tried to pick him up, put him over my shoulder, and dropped him, tried to pick him up again, dropped him again. And Phil said, "Wait a minute, here's Buddha." Buddha was a Bobby Schnell, and Bobby was a weightlifter, and he picked him up, put him over his shoulder, and trotted back to the after part of the ship where they were working on the wounded. Kind of embarrassed me. I was real thirsty, and one side of the passageway leading back to the mess decks had a scuttlebutt drinking fountain. I went to that drinking fountain. There was a stainless steel top. I reached over to get a drink of water, and a black man stared back at me, and blood was running out my nose and ears. And went back to the sick bay, and they said, "You severely wounded need to get up to the radio room. It's on the port side of the ship. That's away from where the Israeli torpedo boats were machine gunning us." I got up to the radio room, and they laid us on the deck because machine gun projectiles were flying around. The Israelis were jamming our distress frequencies, and one of the radio men had figured out that when they were shooting rockets at us, they couldn't jam our distress frequencies because that jamming would screw up the flights of the rockets. And in that brief period of time, he got out this mayday: "Firefox, Firefox, this is Rock Star. Under attack by unidentified surface and air units. Require immediate assistance." And the instant that mayday was acknowledged, the shooting stopped. I saw some sailors taking 3 inflatable life rafts through the radio room. I heard them splash over the side, and I heard a revving of diesel engines and more machine gun fire. One of those sailors came back in the radio room and said, "I don't know what we're going to do now." He said, "They've just riddled our life rafts." Those are the only 3 we had left. The 2 launches that we had been riddled with rocket fire, and nothing left of them but splinters. We had some automatic inflatable life rafts in racks on either side of the ship. The Israelis had dropped napalm on those and incinerated them. Those 3 inflatable life rafts were all we had left. When the Israeli torpedo boats machine gunned those life rafts, it severed one of the lines which held one of those life rafts, and it floated away. One of those torpedo boats came in and picked it up, clearly labeled U.S. Navy. I can't prove it, but it's been told to me that that life raft with the ship's wheel from the torpedo boat that fired the fatal torpedo are in the Israeli Naval Museum at Haifa as a trophy of war. And the United States taxpayer was furnishing the money. The skipper of that torpedo boat that fired that torpedo was the son of the Israeli Admiral Navy commander. There were several violations of international law. The Israelis dropped napalm on us. That's a violation of international law. Machine gun or life rafts. That's a violation of international law. They were using unmarked aircraft. That's a violation of international law. And they were jamming our distress frequencies, a violation of international law. The machine gunning of the life rafts is rather ironic because that international law came about as a result of refugee ships being attacked by Nazi submarines at World War II. How ironic. When that Mayday was acknowledged, the shooting finally did stop. And I heard helicopters. I was in the radio room, so I did not see them, but there were 2 helicopters that came over. Israel had told the world that they were to rescue survivors. Fully armed troops aboard them with machine guns, hand grenades. Excuse me, for survivors. By that time, the Mayday had been acknowledged. The carrier USS Saratoga had launched aircraft come to our rescue. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara had ordered those aircraft to be returned. Joseph Tully, Captain Joseph Tully, who was skipper of the USS Saratoga, had figured out that there were some atomic weapons aboard those aircraft that had been launched. And the order to recover them was probably because of those atomic weapons. He ordered them recovered, ordered conventional armed aircraft to be launched, and again notified Washington that they were on the way. And again, Robert McNamara came on the communications and said, get those aircraft back. Admiral Larry Geis, Lawrence Larry Geis, who was commander of Task Force 6, that included the carriers USS Saratoga, USS America, and the guided missile cruiser USS Little Rock, said that he wanted to hear that from higher authority. Well, the only higher authority than the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, was the President of the United States. Commander Dave Lewis, who had been in the conversation with me, myself, our faces were severely burned from the torpedo explosion. I was facing the explosion. My glasses shielded my eyes. Commander Lewis was perpendicular to it. Shrapnel from the explosion sealed his eyes shut. We were medevaced to the carrier USS America. Admiral Geis was aboard it. 3 days later, I was going by the optical shop, and I looked in and saw Mr. Lewis, Commander Lewis, with his back to me reading an eye chart. So I stood there, and The Navy corpsman said, "Now the other eye." Put it up to his other eye, read the chart, turned around, saw me, said, "Sarge, so good to see you." Admiral Geist had ordered as soon as Mr. Lewis was able to see, he was to come to the Admiral's stateroom. And Admiral Geist told him this story. The aircraft had been launched and were ordered recovered by Secretary of Defense McNamara. Rearmed, relaunched, recovered, ordered again. And Admiral Geist said, "I want to hear that from higher authority." And this is the story he told to Mr. Lewis. The president came on the internet, on the communications, and said, "Get those aircraft back. I will not have my allies embarrassed." Now, the Israelis were using unmarked aircraft, and we did not know who was attacking us. How did the President of the United States know his allies were attacking us? The two attack helicopters left. We had relaxed briefly from our general quarters, and we heard another helicopter. We thought we were under attack again. That helicopter had aboard her the U.S. Naval Attaché, Commander Ernst, last name just escaped me. He dropped a brown paper bag weighted down with an orange onto the deck, and his calling card was in that sack. Commander Ernst Castle, U.S. Naval Attaché, Tel Aviv, Israel. On the back side of his card, he had printed, "Have you casualties?" That brown paper bag with the orange landed next to a severed leg. The decks were covered with remnants of killed sailors. The decks were covered with blood. How could he avoid seeing that we had casualties? One of the sailors picked up that brown paper bag, took it to the captain. The captain read the "Have you casualties?" Stuck his head outside of the cabin and gave the finger to the helicopter. And it was reported that there was one casualty. How ironic. The social finger was one casualty when it was so obvious from all the dead bodies lying around and the blood everywhere. The ship was ordered to go to the island of Malta for repairs. We were alone throughout the night of June the 8th. The nearest U.S. ships were 450 nautical miles away. There was just us, wounded as we were, in the sea. There were 34 Americans killed in that attack. Out of a crew of 294, there were 208 Purple Hearts awarded. Over 2/3 of the crew were wounded. The next morning, two destroyers appeared, the USS Davis and the USS Massey. The Davis sent over emergency medical personnel and damage control people. One of the individuals that was in that first launch to come over was the Navy yeoman. His job was to type death certificates for those who were killed. There was a bosun's ladder which was put over the side, on the starboard side, just aft of the forecastle. He was climbing that bosun's ladder, and it came topside right next to one of the machine gun tubs. Israeli rockets had struck the metal shield around that machine gun tub, exploded, and then obliterated the 2 sailors who were manning that gun. There were remnants of human flesh and blood everywhere. That yeoman almost lost his grip, lost his breakfast, and almost fell back into the sea. And for the next 36 hours, all he did was type death certificates to family. Many of us were evacuated to the carrier Saratoga, carrier America, USS Little Rock. I was told the Admiral Isaac Kidd, 3-star Admiral Isaac Kidd, came to the ship after I had been evacuated, met with the crew, took off his stars, said, "Now tell me what happened." They told him what had happened. He put his stars back on and said, "Now I'm the Admiral. If you mention one word of this to anyone, we'll send you to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and forget about you." The ship was ordered to go to the island of Malta for repairs. That was 5 days sailing at the 5 knots that she was capable of doing without going down. There were facilities 2 days sailing closer on the island of Crete where she could have been repaired. We believe she was ordered to go to Malta, hoping that she would go down en route and spare our government the embarrassment. Years later, at one of our reunions, George Golden, who was the engineering officer aboard the ship, he was a World War II destroyer machinist. He said to me, "Bryce, when we were en route to Malta, that bulkhead was going like this." Can you imagine the stress on the steel that's holding back the sea? A court of inquiry was ordered at Rota, Spain, under Isaac Kidd. He was ordered to conclude that it was a case of mistaken identity, which was the Israeli excuse. The Israelis claimed they mistook us for the Egyptian ship, the USS El Qasir. El Qasir was roughly 1/3 the size of the USS Liberty. It was a World War I horse transport, had not been to sea for 20 years, and was waiting to be cut up for scrap. Mind you, U.S. ships are painted gray with hull markings. This is the international identification. Hull markings in huge letters. The number 5 was 8 feet tall in highlighted white paint on gray navy paint. Egyptian ships are painted black with hull markings in gray in Arabic script. Every highway sign in the state of Israel is in 3 languages: English, Hebrew, and Arabic. Please do not try to convince me that those hole markings could have been confused. Or tell me that the Israeli pilots were colorblind and could not tell the difference between black and gray. The court of inquiry lasted a grand total of 5 days. Estimates by the JAG staff: a proper investigation would have taken 9 months. Some years later, the U.S. guided missile destroyer Daryl Cole was attacked in the port of Yemen. 17 sailors were killed in that attack. That investigation lasted 9 months. Twice as many were killed. Multiple numbers were wounded aboard the USS Liberty, and that inquiry lasted 5 days. Members of our own crew who tried to tell about what had happened were refused to allow testimony. We need to take a break here.
إني كل